right? You got a Rex with 5 dinosaurs in green, you got a Rex with 5 dinosaurs in red, you've high rolled. But that doesn't necessarily make this highly tuned per se.
Hello and welcome to the Forgeborn Finishing School. Casey, Kid, and Core here. We'll be analyzing Forgeborn battles to help take your game to the next level.
Welcome back, everybody. Last week we talked about how we look when we tier decks, what our criteria for S tier, A tier decks, B tier, C tier, and D tier can just go right on off. So this week we're going to be going into some more specifics on some of those decks where we're going to say, this deck we consider an S tier, and here's why, along with a couple of A and a B tier deck as well. But before we get into that, I would like to give a shout out to Brandon for what I assume is going to be an awesome event last week at the Great Plains Gaming Festival. And I'm going to guarantee that I had an amazing time, but we're actually recording before I go. So we'll do a recap on that event on the next episode, so make sure to check it out. So going into that, Ryan, let's talk about
the magic of video editing. We are in the future. So, I do want to give one more shout out to the digital Kickstarter, not Kickstarter, sorry, client starters only event. That is going to be on March the 30th. Last week, the link was in the description. This week, it's in the description. Please sign up. That's your chance to get one of those commemorative nodes named after you, and maybe even have a little bit of flavor into it as to like what your play style is or what your name alludes to, some things like that that can do some really fun stuff. It's going to be a good event, and we are going to talk about some of the starters a little bit later. So let's open up with this graphic that probably looks a little bit familiar if you tuned in last week with us. So this is the S, A, B, and C tiers. And now we've replaced with kind of how we look at decks to fit into those categories with deck archetypes that we believe fit those categories. So if you look at this S tier, Greg, up at the top right, I had to throw this in there. Any Infinite Stitcher deck is automatically an S tier. With the ease of hitting that infinite potentiality, it can generally beat any deck at any given point, as long as it hits that infinite loop, which is fairly consistent. So we're going to put that one up there. If you aren't aware, please check out the videos where we've talked about it, or Eli, more than most, put out a really great video that explained the Infinite Stitcher loop. And he's popularized the archetype because he was the first one to play it at a competitive event. Using the Summoning Stitcher, and so with any other Stitcher, and then the Hematophagic Harvester. So that got it kind of kicked off there. So those decks are what I would say are like the 0.00002% of decks you're going to find. Right now, I think there's only 3 half decks out there that are compatible for making that. So it's kind of a caveat off there on the right-hand side. If you see an Infinite Stitcher deck, if you see a Summoning Stitcher or a Mystical Stitcher, know that you have an S-tier deck.
And it can just go right on off as well.
One could hope. And that. So now let's look at the ones we're going to run into more often. And if you've been following Solforge Fusion or playing Solforge Fusion, these are you're probably going to have went up against these like instinctively. They're very powerful, but these are your highly tuned Rumblespark Elemental decks, your Krogius Army Commander 4 decks, Dizzian Life Gain, or Dizzian DFD. Right now, I think those are the 4. I'm not saying that others can't get there, right? We talked last week about how the meta kind of evolves, shifts, moves. We think it's settled right now, and it's a semi-confident answer, but the meta's never settled, right? Something will always be found, or a new set will arise.
Yeah, and you speak, new set. We have one launching here in a month, 2 months, right? Getting access to, so we are going to hopefully see the meta shake up. That's usually kind of the expectation when a new set hits. We did see that in set 2. There was a lot, talk about that. We didn't early on thinking maybe that it wasn't going to shift, but we saw that there was a big shift with Rumblespark coming out there. So hopefully we see some other deck moving into that limelight as well. And so it'll be interesting to see. And again, like you mentioned, the Rumblespark, the Krogius, AC4. We got the Dizzian Life Gain, Dizzian DFD. We've seen the premiere of these decks consistently perform well.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. That's kind of the key to the S tiers. Like consistently, it's going to consistently do well over long periods of time against many different archetypes. And You mentioned the set 2 shaking up the meta with Rumblespark Elemental. I do want to throw out for everyone, you're not going to see it on here, but there was another archetype that definitely took up to the S tier range for a short amount of time when set 2 came out, and it wasn't instantly found. It took a little bit of time, but that was the what we call the Mad Lab, Syntheta's Lab, Mad Winter. It had some interactions that could very easily go infinite and take over the game, which it was probably not quite as consistent as the Infinite Stitcher, but very close. I would say it's very close to the same level, but there was a rule change that kind of removed that interaction from the Mad Lab, which I would say you don't see it on here, but I'd probably still put it around the A tier. If it's highly tuned, it's going to be an A tier deck.
Yeah, it's a good. That's, as I said, it's a good point. And when a lot of that was going down in testing, we weren't even seeing necessarily the most optimal versions of those decks, and they were still being able to hit that infinite loop early and consistently as well.
Yeah. So let's drop down into the A tier, and you're gonna kind of notice a theme, right? And maybe we'll take a moment to define highly tuned a little bit, just so there's no issues with that verbiage. But at the S tier we have highly tuned of a certain archetype. So when we go down to the A tier, you're gonna see those same archetypes, but now we're probably talking at the average or below average level that they're gonna fall into the A tier. And then the highly tuned of the next archetypes, that's where it's going to fit in at A, and it's kind of a cascading effect as you work your way down. A tier did kind of do something a little bit different here, though, because I think the ease of Rumblespark Elemental and Krogius AC4 decks have with a win condition, that win condition's built in, how easy it is to get. The average or below average are going to be A, but with the Dizzy and Life Gain and Dizzy and DFD, you still probably need to have an above average of those decks to hit into A, because they can very easily fall into B. But Rumblespark, Krogius, if you have any half decks that meet that meta requirement or archetype requirement, you're sitting at A.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're just looking at your average or below average on those. I mean, even with a below average Rumblespark deck, it's going to be hard to deal with for a lot of decks. And then you're talking about your above average Dizzy and Life Gain, Dizzy and DFD decks. Again, those being above average, that's where you see it. I think in this tier is probably where you see a lot of these decks, and you see them a lot in a lot of the tournaments. So when you're looking across all the tournament platforms, not necessarily the Dizzy and DFD, but the Dizzy and Life Gain, I think predominantly you're seeing in that upper bracket across multiple tournaments, and you're seeing a large variation in those decks.
Yeah, and I think, taking a hard look at what makes them above average and just average, to fall down to the B tier, it is kind of a honed skill. And the more you play those life gain decks, the quicker you're going to see them. You're going to see what works consistently, what doesn't work consistently. Having access to a thing like Dizzy and Siphon, not a lot of people might realize right off the bat how powerful of a tool that is to have at your beck and call. Things like that are what kind of just separates above average versus average. And I think if you look out, like you said, there's a bunch of life gain decks out there, but there's only a couple that are consistently being able to hit the higher placings.
Yeah, I think, and we're gonna do call back to the previous episode where we talked about single play lines versus multiple play lines, right? If you just have a Dizzy and Life Gain that it's really just gaining life, it's probably gonna fall into the B tier. But when you have a Dizzy and Life Gain deck that not only is gaining life, but it also has some heavy hitters or going off of a couple kindred creatures or breakthrough options or being able to spam out Oak Fathers, you're starting to get these different play lines now that give you options. Is what's going to bring it above average.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is probably a good point. There's probably some people out there that are listening are saying, well, what makes Dizzy and Life Gain separate from Krogius AC4? And they can meld. They can obviously be the same thing. And what you will often see is that S tier Krogius AC4 is Dizzy and Life Gain. It generally has Life Gain involved to a heavy degree. That's what's going to give it into that highly tuned stage and move it up to the S tier. Dizzy and Life Gain to hit the S tier, it has to be on a level all of its own and not have the Krogius AC4 combo, essentially. Yeah. And we've seen a good few of those that can do it. Like you said, spamming Oak Fathers or other things that really kind of help you take over the game. I do want to take a minute to talk about highly tuned, because we're just about out of the highly tuned talks here, except for there's a little bit in B. But when we talk about highly tuned, there was a moment in last episode where Greg really went down through all of the things that make a deck really synergistic, and then started adding some other things in there, like the big bodies, right? The removal, the toolbox answers. We're talking about all of those kind of things aligning in a deck to have it highly tuned. And we brought up the word dead card. Stoneblade has done a phenomenal job with the design of this game to really limit dead cards. So I will say, when we use that, it's not that card is dead and that there's literally never a best use case scenario, but it means the best use case scenario is very minimal. And that oftentimes you have much better plays. So that card is very minimally used, if ever. So not a dead card in the truest sense, but it is very unlikely you will ever play it. And it also doesn't match the intent of your archetype or of your deck or of your synergy that you've paired into it.
Yeah. And to kind of go into that a little bit, again, we're going to do another callback to a couple episodes ago, 2, maybe 3. We were talking over your deck played in a tournament and weekends deck, I believe, where when you're looking at the half deck of a green deck and you're like, your 2 worst cards are probably Groot and Steelplate, like, you could consider those dead cards in those decks because you're very unlikely to play them, but they're still good cards. Like, they're still useful. Like, you know. And the other thing is just because a deck has a few dead cards doesn't mean it's a bad deck. Like, you're not playing all of your cards. And even when you get a card of 5, you're still, you know, even in the most tuned decks, rarely do you play all 5 cards. There are some that do that, you know. We've seen that, but you can't play all your cards. So it's not the end of the world if you have 2 or 3 dead cards in each half deck, right? Very rarely that those come up. Maybe if you had 3 in each, that's where you start falling off of the highly tuned, right? It's kind of hard to have a highly tuned deck when there's a chance that you could just draw all inefficient cards in one go. But as you reduce that number down, you reduce that chance of having a dead draw, essentially. So,
yeah, that's a good point. And I would go so far as to say an S tier deck would never have more than 2 quote-unquote dead cards or non-synergistic or non-aligned cards. 2 is probably the limit for an S tier, I would say, but
2 total across both half decks.
No, 2.5.
2.5 decks. Yeah. You'd be hard pressed, and even then, a lot of times your dead card is still a situational card. But yeah, I think a pure dead card. Yeah, I don't think you could have more than 2, and you'd be hard pressed for true dead card to be 3. I think you're gonna have 2, 1 in a situational. I think you're good, right? So.
Yeah, and that goes back to that dead card isn't ever truly dead. So let's round out A here, and this is where we kind of talked about how, like, all right, so highly tuned of other archetypes start to float in, and this is not an exhaustive list. Like, I honestly believe almost any archetype in the deck, if it was highly tuned, could fall up into the A category. So I'm just listing off some, Dinosaurs, Mad Lab, Bizarrack spells, DJ Drix, Despairing Krogus, Umbrock spells or Beatdown. Again, if there's a intent out there, even if you're making your own archetype, if you have 2 half decks that are highly tuned and they don't fall into those other categories, like, it's not going to not be an A tier deck.
And you could toss in, let's say, a highly, like, you would say, well, Warriors in the most cards usually probably B tier, right? Like,
yeah.
But if you have a highly tuned Warrior deck, let's say a lot of your Warriors end up getting, like, Breakthrough and Aggressive, and you get it highly tuned, you can fall into that category again, right? There's so much flexibility, or I guess variance with the Forge keywords on creatures that it's a very rare chance, but it's possible, right? So I guess that's where I'm going at.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into the B tier, because I did use the highly tuned word down here. So you probably say, Ryan, you just said you could have any highly tuned half decks and probably make it an A. But this is why I used the faction terminology, Ortec and Ixiom. Like, I have 2 highly tuned red and blue decks. They don't necessarily go together, but they're just the colors I'm matching together. But they have really cool tribal synergies that don't actually match, but they're both highly tuned. You could probably still find your way down into the B tier deck. I don't think anyone's going to throw some shade for me using Ortec and an Ixiom as, like, the step stool here, because it's pretty widely known they're not that powerful, generally speaking. They have a hard time being powerful, and that's because their synergies don't align in a very strong mechanic in the game.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. It would be hard to find an A tier scientist deck.
Right.
That'd be really
Outside of Mad Lab, you
hard.
know,
Outside of Mad
like
Lab, yes.
you could call it a scientist deck, but we all know it's the Mad Lab doing the work.
But even then, if you pair it in the purple, is it A tier, right? Like,
I think it could be, but there's some things that could be done really fun. But you're right. Like right now, we've seen Asperian be the Mad Lab of choice.
Yeah.
With those powerful replacement synergies. And this is where the B tier, like this is where your average dinosaurs. I should have deleted Mad Lab. I don't know that Mad Lab could be made into a B tier deck, to be honest, but it probably could be.
I think your Mad Lab.
Hey, I have rose tinted colored glasses on. Like when I look at Mad Lab, a little biased.
It's a lot of fun, and it can really go off, and it has some really great matchups that some decks just can't deal with it.
Yeah.
Right. But there's other decks where like if it goes into a deck that's just all breakthrough, it's not gonna have a good day.
Yeah. Yep. I hear you. So this is the average of all, like the average level of these decks. Like, hey, I see some cool dinosaurs, and I see some other cool dinosaurs, and I'm gonna slap them together. There might not necessarily be much tribal synergy. Like I have a chant of Umbrook, but hey, I got 5 dinosaurs. It's gonna work out. It's probably gonna be a B tier deck. I'm already expecting the new comment below that dinosaurs can't be B tier. I get it. Like it'll probably we're gonna get some downvotes for this, but.
So, I mean, you could say dinos are B tier, they're the best tier.
There you go. Hey,
or maybe we finally have
a vote there.
Or I'm gonna make me really mad at me. Maybe dinos are D tier. For Dino tier. It's Dino tier. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
Just kidding.
But yeah, so B tier is literally like, hey, I got a kind of a plan here. You know, we talked about that. There is an archetype. An archetype exists, and I've put decks together that say it exists, that have some warriors, some mages. Let's do mage stuff, generally speaking. I want to get down to the C tier. This is the below average of all of the above archetypes. If I pull up a half deck that says I have 1 dinosaur, 1 robot, 1 warrior, 1 mage, right? And I slap it into another deck that's got 2 mages, and I call this a mage deck. No, it's not going to work. So this is the non-synergistic tribal archetypes that they just don't mesh. As we said last week, it's pretty hard to really get a C tier deck, and then what differentiates a C tier from a B tier is pretty negligible in my mind. So what are your thoughts here, Greg? We've wrapped them all up. You got any final parting shots before we get into looking at some decks?
No, I don't think I have any final shots. Maybe no. And kind of going back up to the top essay. I know we spent a lot of time up in this area, but this is where we see a lot of, primarily in the A, probably A and B. We see a lot more decks at it here. But we can see that Krogius AC4. It's a big topic among the community. It's a pretty popular deck archetype. And again, some of the things that are going to differentiate between those decks is, are you running Forge Seal and Mantis? You're just running Mantis. Now, just because you're not running both of them, like, I don't think an S tier deck has to have both Mantis and Forge Seal, but I think it does have to have Mantis. And then, so those are some of the things to think about. I think you'd be hard pressed to, I think any Krogus, I guess any Krogus AC4, even without, I don't know, I feel like you have to almost have one of them to be in A tier. Can you have a B tier Krogus AC4 deck? I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So, those are some of the things to think about when you're looking at the decks, as well. So
you bring up a good point that I'd like to throw out, Greg, in that we put Krogius AC4. It took me a long time to decide what I thought the better version was, but I'm firmly on the AC4 is the right answer with the Mantis and the Forge Seal. But Krogius AC3 is a thing, and I don't want to throw it out and say it isn't. And I think Krogius AC3 has the chance to be S tier. So in my mind, I think I put Krogius AC3 in the same S and A kind of categories here. But if there is going to be a B tier Krogius deck that's Army Commander, it's got to be 3 in my opinion, and even still that's unlikely because it's still very, very good. So
I haven't thought about this. Just if you're having a B tier one, I think it's Krogius AC4 with no Mantis or Forge Steel, whereas Krogius AC3 without Mantis or Forge Steel is probably could be up in the A tier because you're able to trigger that in third cycle.
Cycle 3, turn 2, yeah.
Yeah, whereas you're not able to do that with the AC4. You got to get to the fourth turn, and at that point, if you're waiting for the fourth turn for your Krogius to go off, you're probably not beating an A or S tier deck because those should be finishing the game in cycle 3.
Yeah, lower. That's a good point. I think you could have a Krogius AC4 deck without a Mantis or a Forge Seal, and then not a lot of other things going on good with it to get you that below average, maybe settle down into the B.
But if your life gain synergy was really strong in that deck, then it could bump it up even without the Mantis or Forge Seal because you could try to live long enough to outlast your opponent, and you probably have some other stuff going on. So again, I know we're nitpicking here and it's small nuances, but that's kind of the levels you're getting to when you're looking at between these between these decks. There's a lot of variance, not only the deck draw but also just the timing of when things work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what we're going to do now is we've pulled out, I think, 5 decks that we just kind of want to go through that we think show the levels that you're looking for to hit certain tiers. And so let's jump into that. Do you want to start at C or S, Greg?
Let's kick it down to C tier and work our way up.
So we're going to start with the C tier, and this is honestly one of my personal favorite new finds. And so we've kind of been plugging the digital starter deck tournament. And if I were playing in this event, if I get there, this is what I will probably play. This is the Alolan Tempest starter deck that every person owns. When you create an account now, you get these decks. I firmly believe that this is a B tier deck. So we don't actually have, it's like a low B, high C. Let's call it there. This straddles the line.
That's fair. Yep.
Again, this goes back to it's probably rather hard to find a C tier deck, but this deck does a lot of things really, really well without having an overpowering synergy, or that much of a synergy. Other than I would say there's a little bit of replacement synergy, but that's because you're playing Alolan, right? Like you're just gonna have that, and then there's a little bit of Mage synergy, not a ton, but just enough. So let's break down why I think this is a B tier. It is not highly tuned in any way, shape, or form. It's not a highly tuned Aura Tech deck that firmly puts it into that B tier per se, right? It's just pretty strong 2 decks that have an aligned strategy. That's why it's kind of low B, high C. So looking at these Forgeborns, I'm going to go out and say I prefer to play the... you can play either or. I prefer to play the Sunder in this one, just for that play a free spell at cycle 2, very powerful. But if you look down through these, so War Machine is a 210 with replacement. That's a 410. If it's a Gizmo, it's much bigger. The Venerable Assassin, 7-5 with Stealth. Voltaic Prophet, 6-5. Steadfast Justicar, 6-4. The Stout Giant, 3-7. Fleet Colossus, 6-5. 3-7 Combat Spell Knight. Has a chance to get bigger. This kind of fits a lot of the big bodies things. So it's just very strong up front. Its spell package is pretty heavy removal, in my opinion, but you got to be creative with that removal. So Scythian Augmentation allows you to deal a bunch of damage to the opponents with, if you have a mage in play. Lightning Spark removal, Conflagrate removal, Disintegrate removal, Suppressing Prophet removal. So what's really cool here is that not only is this a suppressing toolboxy creature, it's also a mage that fits some of your other requirements, right? It allows you to get off Scythian Augmentation or Conflagrate a little bit stronger. So all of those things together, right? I never once explained an overarching replacement synergy or an overarching mage synergy. It's not a bad mage synergy, but there's 2 cards and 5 mages. So there's actually, 6 warriors with Force Field is also another nice plug. So it just has those little nucleuses that decent synergies that don't necessarily work together, right? Kind of competing, but works out pretty well. And you'll if you try this deck out, it has quite a bit of answers at any given stage of the game. So tie this back to a warrior synergy, a mage synergy, 2 kind of non-sympathetic or synergistic synergies, but it does both pretty well and plays them together okay.
It's a nice review of the deck, and so I'm gonna and I agree with everything you said. I can see this being a low B, high C deck. So I'm gonna give the argument on why you could classify this as a C deck into the C category. And then just for another counterpoint, why I like I would play Steel Rosetta in this case, and that's just for the upgrade, because I think the one thing I would play the Steel Rosetta because of the gizmo kind of plays into that. I know you're getting a free spell with the other one, but the enhance can get you on track for what may be the card that can save this against some of the higher matchups, which I'll go into. Tinker's always good, and then Inspire gives you the kill option that Sunder has in the end game. But again, not a lot, because you're not getting a lot of free spells, which is why I'm going to put this, why I would say this is a point why you can put this into the C tier. Is the only thing that's really got going for it is some synergy, but only within, two non-synergistic pieces. You don't have a lot of free plays. So when we talked about going through the list of things, big bodies, this does have big bodies, right? Like, that's good. 2-for-1s, you've went over those. Those are really good on here. You're not really getting free plays. Your free play is Everflame Aura. Not really game breaking or huge, but it can be a free play. And then Energy Surge at 3rd level. And that's, again, kind of why I would go with Rosetta, to make sure that you get that online. That's going to help you probably against some of those better tuned decks when it gets down to the wire. Hitting that on the 3rd turn for a free play could be pretty impactful. So you're lacking a lot of free plays. You have some synergies, but not a whole lot. I think there's a lot of dead cards in this, Yeah, they all kind of have usage and they can do something, but they're not really gaining you a huge advantage in some cases, right? Your best synergies in this deck are going mages, so you kind of got your Stout Giant just kind of sitting there. The Voltaic Prophet is a mage, goes into things as well. It's a big body. Combat Techno Hulk, not doing a whole lot. War Machine can be useful. It's a big body, but that's all it's doing for you, right? So you're just playing one play, and then you're leveling up that card instead of other ones. You're getting a lack of leveling up cards in this deck. So again, I said Everflame Aura, kind of card. Situational Conflagrate and Disintegrate. They'll hit you if they hit you in the hand at the wrong time. So it kind of just lacks, I feel, some consistency that could knock it down. But again, so that's what I'm going to say on that. Just kind of as a counterpoint, it's lacking some of those things, but I could definitely see where this could be a B tier, and I would agree with that assessment as well.
Yeah, and definitely low B tier. And one thing that you said that kind of resonates, sometimes I will see a deck and I'll say that lacks identity. That's also a key part. Like, this deck to me lacks identity, other than you say, well, there's mage synergy, but it doesn't go far enough into the mage synergy to really to be powerful. So yeah, you got the competing warrior mage. So yeah, definitely high C, low B arguments to be made there. Greg, let's jump up into the next deck that also kind of gets close to a straddling point.
Yeah, so here we're looking at the Dino, and here I would put this firmly in B, and I don't think there's anything C about it. The thing with this one that's going on is it's got access to removal that can occur multiple times. It is requiring you to hit on the Rex. You also have both Rexes. I'm a huge fan of Steadfast Rex. Once you get into level 2, it's just popping somebody in the face for 13 if you're off Forge, right? You've got, is it 10 dinos in this?
Yep. Yeah.
10 dinos, yeah. Feral Instinct, good card with dinos. I like it. Druidant, not bad. Lightning Brand, how many mages we got in here? I don't think you have a whole lot.
No, there's 2 mages.
Yeah, situational. But it does have the Stomp Eating Monosaur, Thundersaur as part of your 2 dinos. Batterhide's always good. Situational, good card, and a dino. I like the Shardplate Delver, really good card. Obviously, you have the Shifting Rex, which is a good Rex. I like this Rex. I mean, there could be better Rexes, a Stealth or a Camouflage, but it's got 6 health, so it's hard to deal with. You usually get 2 turns out of it, which is huge. Yep. Possibly more. Taliesin, extra plays is huge. Uterra Mauler is huge. Basher, Breakthrough Dinosaur. So it's got that Dino synergy. Can hit really hard. It's got the Rex for removal. And the way this deck, this is really with any dinosaur deck, and we've seen this on stream before. It can just go off. If you get that Rex to stick, it's gonna punch above its weight class. So, good deck. Anyways, what are your thoughts on it, Ryan?
Yeah, I also firmly put this in the B category. But before, when I said it's kind of straddles the line, is I think a lot of people would look at this and see the Rex and 10 dinosaurs and go, okay, well that obviously high rolled, right? You got a Rex with 5 dinosaurs in green, you got a Rex with 5 dinosaurs in red, you've high rolled. But that doesn't necessarily make this highly tuned per se. So it is missing some of the spell dinosaur payoffs that could be really powerful, that give you that flexibility, right? This deck, although there's 10 dinosaurs and the Rex, without your green Utera Rex sticking to the board, your removal is non-existent. So this has very, very dedicated win play line, typically. And that is either I'm somehow just out big creaturing you, which against any A tier deck is very unlikely. It's that you let the Utera Rex stick on the board too long and that all the removal, overran you. So it has that one dedicated play line. Even though it looks to be like a potentially high-tuned deck, it's not. It falls short in a couple key categories. So I think this is a really cool deck. I love playing this. This is one of my favorite decks to play. But I thought it was a very good example of a B-tier deck that could appear to be an A-tier deck. And like you said, it can appear that way because it can punch above its weight class very easily.
Yeah, and this and a C tier deck is gonna struggle against this deck. Like it's just because it's just not gonna be able to keep up with the power of the bodies that you're putting into play. And you mentioned, what would this look like if it were an A tier deck? I think you'd move out some of the non-dinosaurs for better situational cards. And you'd be looking at changing the spells, like if you got a little bit more synergistic spells that were in there, right? Or some options for free plays. Then you can see this shifting up into that A category, but without those, I think, you're right, firmly in the B tier.
Right, we're gonna move up now to what is a very solid A tier deck, and this is a world's placing deck. I think top 4, and a lot of credit to the pilot. But this is what I would call a highly tuned outside of the top meta deck, right? Outside of the top archetype deck. And so this is what would kind of fit into the DJ Drix or Asperian Krogius. It doesn't have repurpose on Rosetta, which is kind of where the DJ Drix name came in. Outside of Drix is literally a DJ. But, kind of the spinning, the coming back, the repurpose. But, this is definitely fits that same archetype, which I think is just below the cusp of S tier. In a highly tuned Asperian Krogius deck and a highly tuned Krogius AC4 deck, the Krogius AC4 is going to have the consistent win path. But let's take a quick look at this deck and see what's all going on here. So Drix is very powerful. This is a win condition in its own right if it gets at level 3 and it sticks on the board. Level 2 itself is very powerful, but level 3, any creature you're playing on top of its Mega Gizmo is 10/10. That's pretty monstrous. So there's a potential play. And then Krogius, we know, is a win condition there. It's using the Enhance on level 1 to potentially cheat it up a level, and then as well as Energy Prison to potentially cheat it up a level within the deck. Not Energy Prison. Yeah, there it is. Yep, to upgrade it. And so you kind of have those potential options. And then also, Hibernating Mantis is always a very powerful card. Magnivorous in the meta against the archetype decks is just a powerful forge word on anything. You throw it on something with Breakthrough, that's a great addition to the deck. Batterhide. So let's talk about Toolbox right now. Let's jump into Toolbox. You have Batterhide, you have a Stabilizing Specimen, you have a Suppressing Inventor, you have a Synapse, which is another upgrade on top of a Tinker. Right? All the utility that those provide to control your opponent's board. And then you have Electronet, Energy Prison, and Toxic Spores. These are all very control aspected cards, and they fit the synergy of the deck very well to assist it with getting to cycle 3 to get Krogius on the board. Right, that's this whole deck's win condition is either Drix level 3, Krogius level 3, and to get those on the board, you got to get to level 3. Right, so this deck helps control your way all the way there with some very good cards along the way.
Yeah, and some other pieces in here that, again, they're not really dead cards. I mean, even the Arrogant Virtuoso is 8 attack. That deals with the Dark Art. So to me, that's a fantastic level 1 card to have in your back pocket. Battle Droid deals with the Dark Art, level 1, right? So Shield Bearing Hulk is a 1 dead card.
Yeah, that's probably the one.
As you mentioned, Stabilizing Specimen. That's really good in the meta.
Yep.
Suppressing Inventor is awesome. So you nailed it. Snaps his Tinker, right? Mantis is huge. Basher. Even the Pack Ranger is not necessarily that bad because it's got the pack in it. But again, this is probably another one of those cards that's just generally not paid. But in the event that you are able to fill a board, he can be pretty beefy, but probably not played very much. Refreshing Hunter, good. Another really good toolbox card. And again, it's got 2 refreshing on the Batter Hide and Hunter. You're playing things that can drop minions. You got Drix, Warmonger mod, Inventor, Steel Rosetta. So you can take advantage of gaining some life. That helps. Allows you to just take another hit, right? Again, you're using that as a resource. Hunter's Toolbox, Batter Hide's Toolbox. Shroudstrom Splicer's another toolbox card. Again, you can pop this to deal with a Dark Heart. But again, when we're in these A and S tiers, that's something that you want to be able to have answers for, right? Are some of those high defense cards. And again, I Am Groot. It's not a bad card. It's probably not played very much in this deck, but if you go that play line, it's a big body. So again, these are things that we've kind of mentioned in all the other ones. You have options and you have play lines and you have ways to deal with other cards. So there's not a lot of dead cards in this deck. So
Yeah, I think I would look at the Techno Hulk and Might of the Herd probably. But, Might of the Herd is always a sneaky aggressive. But yeah, so just solid all around. All of the cards fit with what the deck is trying to do, which allows it to consistently get to its end game.
Yeah, and you could even say Might of the Herd. That's like a 25% chance if you're off Forge, you have that with Krogius to drop.
Yeah.
If you just play Krogius to drop Might of the Herd on it. Get your Krogius to turn earlier, right? So yeah, options.
So let's now we're gonna break down 2 S tier decks, Greg. If you want to jump into this, this is a Rumble Spark deck.
Yeah, so I think this is Eli's Rumble Spark deck. I believe this is the one that he used to win the League of Champions. Does that sound right?
Yep.
I gotta play it. It's a very fun deck. I mean, just what it has available and seeing it in action. There are just so many ways to flip Rumble in this deck. Looking at starting down here at the bottom, Unstable Vortex right there. Elemental, Arrogant Sentinel, Elemental. Obviously, you have your Nova Elementalist, Stampeding Colossus, Breakthrough, putting that in the lane, flip it. Stampeding Monster is always just a good card. Removal, quasi removal. Tortoise Colossal. Again, a sneaky way to potentially get with the aggressive portion of it. Charger Mammoth, aggressive breakthrough, another great card to trigger in the Rumble Spark lane. Shambling Summoner, fantastic card. Hard to kill. It's got Defender, high defense. Let's get the shambling effect again. Can trigger Rumble Spark. Plus you're getting minions, spells, Shambling Mioba again, triggering Portal Shade, Stealth. Again, another way to trigger or to activate to get your breakthrough creatures up higher. Necrotic Apparition. Probably one of the only dead cards in this deck. It's not even a dead card because I love the Necrotic. Like, you need to just make sure you block a lane. You just drop that and you have to deal with it twice in a half turn, right? Like, yeah. Necrotic has saved me games.
And the Apparition gives you free access when you have a Shambler sitting in the Rumble Spark energy lane to drop your Apparition, sacrifice a person, activate Rumble Spark.
Yeah. So. Yeah, great. Yeah, great. Another piece on it. Indomitable Fiend. Yeah, there's some cards in here that can work with that. Again, in this deck, not a whole lot of sacrifice besides the Apparition you mentioned. Infernal Ritual going in there. Dark Heart Sorcerer, again, kind of a staple in Rumble Spark decks to get it much more consistent, just being able to drop that in the lane, play a spell. And then Spell Suite. It's fantastic. Dreadbolt. Everybody should try to have a Dreadbolt in their deck if they can. It's great. It's a great spell.
Close to a meta requirement.
Howl of Zith in this deck, it works really well. Stealth on a creature, again, can help proc Rumble Spark or just punch a bunch of, if you get your Rumble Spark up to a lot of damage, because one of the ways to try to beat the deck is just trying to keep chump blocking the Rumble Spark but not killing it. And so you're just like, okay, I'll just give it Stealth this turn. Infernal Ritual. This is a card that can win you games, plus it works really well with Rumble Spark. Again, I'm just Fireheart Idol, another spell being played, does damage. You're playing others, I'm just going through all these cards and they're really good in this deck. Burnout,
yeah,
fantastic spell. Wardbringer Ritual, fantastic spell. Spells that you want to play, and then they work even better when you have Dark Heart and Rumblespark on the field. So, so many different play avenues to whittle your opponent down, even outside of the Rumblespark. And so that's something we kind of talked about. Your Rumblespark energy to be an S tier deck has to be a deck that can consistently win without Rumblespark. And I think this deck can do it. And I think it has done it, right? We've seen that. So,
yeah, this when I was out looking for an S tier Rumblespark, this is one that popped straight into my head. This is one of the most powerful ones I've seen. I would say easily top 3, and if I looked and broke it down and put those 3 against each other, I wouldn't be surprised if this falls out on top. I won't go through the cards because you went through every single one. But if you look at this creature suite, there are only 2 creatures in my mind, and I would go as far as say actually 1. There's only 1 creature in my mind that can't assist activating Rumblespark by playing it, and that's the Indomitable Fiend. And the Indomitable Fiend isn't a bad card in this deck because you have Infernal Ritual, you have the Apparition, you have options to potentially use it to its fullest ability, and then sometimes it's always just a great chump blocker that survives. Look at how many creatures are in this deck, and every single one except Indomitable Fiend in some way, shape, or form is going to help you activate Rumblespark and get it back on the board. That's bananas.
Yeah.
So there it is. If you have a Rumblespark deck and you're wondering if yours is S tier, it also doesn't have to be this deck to be S tier, but it has to be close. Like this is the top of the Rumblesparks, or one of the top of the Rumblesparks. It has to be close to this to be S tier, because honestly, I think for every 10 Rumblesparks that are out there, probably only 2 of them are S tier. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now go ahead.
I was gonna say, let's move on to the next deck. And Ryan, I want you to go over this one. This is the World Champion deck.
Yeah, so we've broken this one down after the World Championship. It is the World Champion winning deck. Surprise, we think it's S tier. It's platinum. I don't know if it's officially platinum in the system, but this can never be run in the tournament in Solforge Fusion again, generally speaking, unless there's, once in a lifetime platinum event that comes out.
Nathis, they haven't made it platinum. See it in a tournament.
If it hasn't been done, start playing this thing. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time breaking this one down, because we do have a video dedicated to breaking this one down. Please check it out. But I want to point out some things that make it S tier. Not what make the deck work, but what makes it S tier. Okay. So, Krogius, Army Commander 4, Forge Seal, Mantis. Right there, you've checked the box of the nucleus of what makes this archetype. Okay, so now we've classified the deck. It is firmly Krogius Army Commander 4. It hits the 4 things that say that's what it is. All right. Now let's talk about things that assist that synergy, things that assist that archetype specifically. Corrupt Drone. This is the kind of the wild card. Sometimes you have things like this that are so innately synergistic, not only with itself, like Corrupt is with Drone to allow you that free upgrade, but with the deck itself to help you upgrade cards, right? If Sam can upgrade everything else, he doesn't have to dedicate time to upgrading Krogius, even with his free upgrade stuff. So he can upgrade everything else. And another one specifically is the Necromancer. The Necromancer at level 3 is silly, right? It gets out of hand. And if you miss the Necromancer, you probably didn't miss the drone, right? If you miss the drone, you probably didn't miss the Necromancer. They're kind of a self-solving duo puzzle to help you stay on path. That's consistency, right? That's redundancy. That's how you continuously upgrade all of your cards and have your nucleus intact. Even if you missed one, you're going to see it in cycle 2 when you have the other thing on the board to upgrade it, right? That's the intent. And then a couple other things. So we talked about how you might have some of that Dizzying life gain in some of the S tier decks. You have a Soothing Mantis, which isn't a ton, right? But it is a life proc. You got the Spring Dryad, and you got the Shambling. Those 3 things aren't a ton of life gain. You don't necessarily need a ton of life gain. What you need is to be able to consistently get off free plays. And we get that with Serath's Will and that life gain little nucleus, Botanimate potentially. And then Circe's Call is also a really nice free play. Honestly, we've seen Circe's Call is top 5 spells in the game, no doubt in my mind. It's very powerful. And so the spell suite is also very good. There's removal, Polymorpher, Botanimate. The biggest removal in this deck is the Mantis and the Forge Seal and the Death Touch and the Life Drain. So we talk about all these nucleuses. We don't just say this deck has one piece of removal, right? It can remove, so it can use Death Touch 3 times. It can use Life Drain 3 times. It has the Polymorpher access. It has the Botanimate. So those are the, you know, Reaver, you could say, it's toolbox removal. So those are all those things. And then all of that to say that generally the win condition is Krogius. 8 times out of 10. But 2 times out of 10, you're so overloaded with level 3 cards, you don't know how to deal with anything because the Necromancer, the Corrupt Drone have done their job, and this deck has stalled you long enough. You know, and I didn't go over all the cards. We didn't talk about, you know, one of the deck runner's favorite cards in the Necrotic Walker. You know, it just slows the game down to get to that cycle 3. All right, all the cards do that. All of this deck just works so synergistically to do the things it needs to do. So, Greg, any parting thoughts on this one?
No, it's just it's a fantastic deck. There's just so many different little pieces on it that just work together, and they hope, you know, get the game to cycle 3, and then it just overwhelms you. And the only other caveat I'll say is actually those things 4 times. It has Lead the Charge in there, and so
yeah, good point.
Like, not that it comes up that often, but it does. You know, I've used, you know, Lead the Charge before to pop something off multiple times, but yeah, it's just there's just so many little things on here, and yeah, and it's got, you know, it's just really good. I mean, even is there a dead card?
It's right here. Asperian Steelplate.
I don't even think that's a dead card. It's still a good, like, you can...
It's not the worst card, but it is the card that does not necessarily match synergistically with this deck.
Yeah, and you could say maybe the Dreadmaw in this deck.
That would be. Yeah, but they're still good cards, right?
Still
that's
good
what
cards.
defines an S tier deck. Your worst cards are still good cards.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, if your worst turn 1 is to play Summoning Council, and then replace one of the Wisps with an Asperian Steelplate, you have a 7/7 and a 2/2. That's not a bad first hand, right? It's not optimal. It's not what you want to do in this deck, but that's what we're kind of saying. And like the worst hand you could ever imagine. Let's pick out the 2 cards and let's see what it shows up as.
Yeah, and then you got Steelplate online, which it gets better, right?
Same with Summoning Council, right? No one wants to play 2 Wisps, but level 2, you're ready to play the card. So yeah, so that's kind of us breaking down. Let's throw this back up here. So we just kind of wanted to throw some decks out there. We didn't want to do too many, but we are interested to hear from you. You know, if you have some thoughts on those decks, where we ranked them, what you would do differently, or some cards you really like in there, you know, and why you think that points them into a certain tier, please share that. And if you have a deck that you want to throw down there and say what tier you think it is and why you think it is that, we would also love to see that. That could spark some really good conversation, future content. So really excited to see what you guys have for us in the comments below. Any parting thoughts, Greg?
No, I think we covered it. We rambled enough.
Ramble on. All right. Thanks, everyone, for hanging in.
Bye.
Thanks for attending this lesson of the Forgeborn Finishing School. If you like this video, please subscribe, comment, or consider donating to our Patreon account. We look forward to our next lesson.